Brant is the third limited male character, and it has been quite some time since the last one we actually had to use astrites on. So, I am sure a lot of people are pretty hyped to play him. And, even though his kit looks pretty difficult on paper, at the end of this video you will know exactly how to build and use Brant.
Let the flames rise!
Brant's gameplay revolves around basic attacking the enemy, building up his forte bar and granting heals and shields. First, let's take a look at his forte bar. Brant's forte bar has a couple different effects, so let's go over them. The first is a passive effect, Theatrical Moment. This effect grants Brant 12 attack for every 1% of energy recharge over 150%, with a maximum of 1560 attack. To maximize this buff, you will need a total of 280% energy recharge, which is only reachable with either his signature weapon or the Overture. The second effect, Waves of Acclaims, will heal all resonators when his forte bar reaches 25, 50, 75 and 100 respectively. And finally, when Brant's forte circuit is full, his resonance skill transforms into Returned from Ashes. When you use this, you will consume all of his forte points and deal massive AoE damage, which counts as basic attack damage. When used, he will also generate a shield for all allies, whilst gaining a massive concerto energy. And finally, when you cast this in Aflame, it will end the Aflame state. How do you build up his forte bar, you ask? Well, you can generate his forte bar in a couple different ways. The first is by hitting his basic attacks. This isn't very fast, but you can increase the amount gained with his Liberation. The second is by hitting his intro skill. This will grant about 25% of his forte bar. And the third is by hitting your resonance skill. This is nice, but if you're not using the Molten Rift set, you will not be using this. Now that we know what his forte circuit does, let's see how the rest of his kit works. His Resonance Liberation.
Climax of the show!
To the Horizon is an AoE nuke that deals a neglectable amount of damage, but it does heal all allies when cast. Besides this, Brant will also enter the Aflame state for 12 seconds. The Aflame buff grants a total of 2 effects. The first increases Brant's forte generation efficiency by 100% when his basic attacks or resonance skill hits the enemy. And the second will change Brant's Theatrical Moment into My Moment. So, instead of gaining 12% attack per 1% of energy recharge above 150%, he will instead gain 20 attack per 1% energy recharge above 150%, with the effect stacking up to a maximum of 2600 attack instead of the usual 1560. This will still keep the original 280 energy requirement to fully utilize the buff. This Liberation has a cooldown of 24 seconds whilst having a massive 175 energy requirement. But since Brant builds so much energy recharge, this shouldn't be an issue. Brant's resonance skill has 2 different states. When he is on the ground, the skill will deal some damage and lift him into the air. And whilst he's in the air, the skill will deal some damage and take him to the ground. Brant has some basic on the ground basic attacks, but they're not the star of the show today, because his real strength is in the air. Brant has a whole book worth of text in his mid-air basic attacks. But in short, you can hold his first and second basic attacks to extend them, kind of like Camellia's third mid-air basic attack. And when you pass a bit between the basic attacks, Brant will also do a flip backwards, dealing extra damage. Besides his forte circuit, this is a good source of damage. And finally, his outro skill. His outro skill will increase the incoming resonators' fusion damage by 20%, whilst also increasing their skill damage by 25% for 14 seconds. This buff is obviously made for Chun-Li, but works for some other characters as well. As for his inherent skills, the first will increase the healing done by his forte circuit when it reaches 25, 50, 70 and 100 by 20%. This is pretty nice, granting quite a bit of extra healing. And the second will increase his resistance to interruption during his mid-air basic attacks, whilst also granting 15% fusion damage bonus. This is nice, since without it he is really prone to getting hit out of the air. For his talent priorities, I recommend leveling his forte circuit followed up by his basic attacks. Then follow that up by your Liberation, and you can level your skill and intro if you want.
In the limelight!
For the weapons, we have a couple different options. First, we have the Absolute Pulsation, Brant's signature weapon. This weapon grants a massive 77% energy recharge, whilst the passive grants 8 crit rate and a total of 48% basic attack damage bonus. This weapon is perfect for Brant, giving him more than enough energy recharge, whilst also still gaining massive damage buffs. Looking at all the weapon options for Brant right now, his signature weapon will be the best in the game, and the difference between his best and second best is quite a lot. So, I highly recommend getting his weapon, since this potentially buffs him so much that his tier on the tier list may go up by 1 or 2 tiers. If you don't have his signature however, you can also use the Overture, although it isn't that recommended. Although the passive is quite useless on Brant, the energy recharge from its subset is really nice, making him able to gain the maximum buffs from his passive effect. However, the Emerald of Genesis will be stronger with the Molten Rift set, since the Emerald of Genesis gives more base attack, as well as some energy recharge, some attack percent, and quite a bit of crit rate. And finally, if you don't have any of these weapons, you can always use one of these weapons.
Same actor, different role.
Now, let's talk about echo sets, since Brant uses certain echo sets with certain weapons. First, we have the Tide-Breaking Courage, Brant's signature echo set. But only use this if you have his best in slot, the Absolute Pulsation, or the Overture. The Tide-Breaking Courage is 2-piece, grants 10% energy recharge, whilst the 5-piece increases the Resonator's attack by 15%, whilst also granting 30% attribute damage bonus if you have at least 250 energy recharge. This set is really good, since it'll make your team deal the most damage in total. For the 4 cost, you want to use the Dragon of Dirge, which increases Brant's fusion damage by 12%, as well as his basic attack damage by another 12%. However, if you don't have the Absolute Pulsation or the Overture, you can use the Molten Rift set. Its 2-piece grants 10% fusion damage, whilst the 5-piece grants 30% fusion damage bonus after using a resonance skill. This is pretty good for Brant, and although the damage will be slightly lower than his signature weapon with the Tide-Breaking Courage, it will still be a great option nonetheless. For the 4 cost, you can use the Nightmare Inferno Rider, since it grants 12% fusion damage bonus. You can use the standard version as well, since it grants 12% fusion damage bonus as well as 12% basic attack damage bonus, but do keep in mind that you will have to use this echo, which can take up some time of your rotation. You can use the Molten Rift set with any of the remaining weapons. For the stats, you want to run a standard 4-3-3-1-1 on Brant, with crit rate or crit damage on the 4 cost. You'll want energy recharge on the 3 cost unless you have over 290 energy regen, since at that point it's better to use a fusion damage bonus 3 cost together with an energy recharge piece. And finally, you want attack percent on the 1 cost. For the subsets, you want energy recharge, preferably a total of 280 to gain the maximum amount of buffs. After that, at least 65% crit rate, followed by crit damage, basic attack damage bonus, attack percent, and finally, if you roll a flat attack roll, it shouldn't hurt too much.
Oath from the heart.
As for Brant's teams, he has quite a few. The first will be Brant paired up with Changli and a healer. In this team, Brant will function as the sub DPS, while Changli is the main DPS. This will likely be his best team for a while, since Brant is the teammate Changli has been waiting on since 1.1. The next team will be Brant paired up with Carlotta and a healer. Carlotta will not be able to fully utilize his auto skill, since it grants 20% fusion damage, but she will still benefit from the 25% skill damage bonus, since Carlotta mostly deals skill damage. Now, for the free-to-play teams, the first will be Brant paired up with Chisha. Chisha deals resonance skill damage whilst also being fusion, so Brant's buffs will be in full effect on Chisha. And for the final team, it will be Brant as a main DPS paired up with Sanwa and a healer. Sanwa's auto skill is perfect for Brant, granting a lot of basic attack damage bonus. And besides this, Brant also deals quite a bit of damage, making him a pretty viable main DPS. Brant's rotation is pretty simple. You want to start off with his intro, which you can follow up by your resonance skill if you're running the Molten Rift set to activate the 5-piece effect. After that, you want to use your Liberation into your mid-air basic attack 2 hold. Follow this up by a backflip into mid-air basic attack 3, into a flip again, and finally, use your Forte and Echo skill. This should fill Brant's concerto completely. Let's take a look at Brant's sequences now. Brant's first sequence will stagnate enemies when he uses Return from Ashes, making sure it hits the enemy. But that's not all, since every time Brant uses his intro skill or his flip between mid-air basic attacks, he will increase his damage dealt by 20% for 5 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. Sequence 2 is pretty good, since it grants him 30 crit rate on his mid-air basic attacks, as well as his Return from Ashes attack. As for the second part, Brant's outro gets an extra passive. When the incoming resonator casts and hits a resonance skill, Brant attacks the target, dealing 440% basic attack damage. This effect can happen a total of 2 times per outro skill. Sequence 3 increases his Return from Ashes multiplier by 42%, making his nuke even bigger. Sequence 4 increases the shield made by Return from Ashes by 20%, whilst also granting healing equal to 6.6 HP per 1% energy recharge when casting Return from Ashes. Sequence 5 grants Brant 15% basic attack damage bonus after dealing basic attack damage. And finally, Sequence 6 will increase the multiplier of his mid-air basic attacks by 30%, with the second effect making his Return from Ashes deal a second hit, dealing a total of 30% of the original damage again, which is counted as basic attack damage.
Epic shot.
I think Brant looks pretty strong, although I think he does need a signature weapon to deal a lot more damage. His gameplay looks fun and flashy, which perfectly complements Brant's personality. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, may I recommend the video on the screen right now. I appreciate you all. Bye bye.